All right. Good morning, beautiful people of Earth. How are you? Phumi Mashiko is here, and I am here, and you are here, and therefore
everybody's here.
We're ready for a nice 2-day week. Now we had 1 2-day week. Now we're gonna have another 2-day week, right? What do you do with Women's Day?
I absolutely hate holidays that are in the middle of the week.
I said this yesterday, and people got upset with me.
Really?
I said on Instagram, I think it's a waste of time. And I said, I know we're all enjoying the fact that we don't have to do anything and women's blah, 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 because everybody paid lip service to that yesterday, as they always do, including the president. Don't know if you saw him. Well, there was a march on the Union building.
Is that what he said?
Something. Well, of course he's going to say that.
That's not what he said. He said, let me see. I saw something.
He brought up that stupid, well, it's not stupid. There's no stupid march, but they bring it up all the time with Sophie de Bruyn and all of those. Remember those women? That march? He always talks about that.
Like I've met Auntie Sophie.
Yeah, she's hardcore.
She's if you think Auntie Pat is hardcore, you need to meet Auntie Sophie de Bruyn.
Yeah, she came in here once. Well, in the old building, and she sat down for an interview. And she's quite sharp, even now. So how was
They were definitely built different, those ladies.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, doesn't mean we have to keep on talking about the same old story. Like, you get the feeling when you hear these politicians that they're tapping so much into history because there isn't anything for them to tap into right now. Right?
We've spoken about this. We've spoken about even their big grand party on the 8th of January, blah, 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 blah. You know what I did do yesterday?
What did you do?
Sadly, I went to a funeral.
Sorry.
A colleague of ours, his grandfather passed away, his grandfather that raised him. But it was in the West Rand, in Kagiso. Now, the West Rand is the site of what we've been seeing a lot of over the past couple of weeks on the news with all of the zamazamas out here in Gauteng.
Yes, there was a big crackdown this week.
And obviously the people in Kagiso and Carltonville and all of that side, it's top of mind for them. And it's like when we have Leeto on the show, it's always such an illuminating conversation to have with people who are actually living in the moment, in the experience, and all of that. And when you drive down, there are two main ways. Main Reef Road, I think it's renamed now, and Ontekas. But when you drive along Main Reef, you can just see the complete and utter devastation that has happened in that side of the world with all the big mining houses moving out, and then all of what's cropped up with all of the Zamazama economies around it. It's horrifying, horrendous. And on an August day, like yesterday, the dust from the cyanads and the cold and
There was quite a lot of wind yesterday. I suddenly thought, oh God, August's here. Not a moment too soon.
So when you're out there in the West Rand, you're like in the dust bowl.
Yeah,
everywhere, like past.
So
Krugersdorp,
because you'll have been paying more attention to this than most of us. What is the crackdown that the police decide they're finally going to go after these guys? How did it all happen?
They're finally going to pay some kind of lip service to it.
Oh, so you also think that's lip? It's a lot of lip service going on here.
It is. We all watched. I think we all watched. What was that Zimbabwean gold?
Yeah, the
gold mafia.
Gold mafia. That's it.
And saw how the illegal becomes legalized, right?
How they wash the money, essentially,
and wash the gold. And,
of course,
all of that. And this is that part of it. But all of these things are an ecosystem or a value chain that has an illegal part and a legal part. And for the illegal part to thrive, you need well-placed people with enough influence and power in order to make it. I was blown away. One of the guys was telling us, and he works in the mining sector, that crews of 10 kind of illegal miners can make up to 450,000 Rand a week.
Well, there has to be huge. It's a horrible job, right? So there has to be reward at the end of it.
Like
'Cause people-
450,000 rand a
People
week?
just die underground. We never find the bodies. It's the last you hear of them.
Yo.
The reward has to be very significant for people to put themselves at that kind of risk. That's a lot of money, though, huh?
450,000 rand a week, guys.
Jesus.
A week.
No, that's a fortune.
And,
Unbelievable.
And then Peggy is like
Oh,
his hat.
he's such a clown.
Swinging his
oh
dick.
my God. Yeah, what
Like,
a
all of
clown. Did
those
you see him?
things.
Like every time I see that guy on the news, I'm like, what would anyone an alien who arrived on Earth and they saw that, they saw that guy talking, what would they think of us? Right? It's just it's so weird. It's so bizarre.
It's
So you told me, I didn't know about this, and we should really save the politics for later, but Phumi told me something that just, like, again, horrified me. You'll see, we interview Geordin Hill-Lewis, who's the mayor of Cape Town. He's involved in that strike that they're trying to get under control in the Western Cape. We've also had strikes in other parts of the country in the last couple of weeks by municipal workers and a whole lot of other people. But amazingly, Cyril Ramaphosa was meant to do his Women's Day thing in Khayelitsha, you told me. I didn't know this. He was meant to be in Khayelitsha, but because of all the stuff that's going on there with the taxi strike, he, like a coward, decided to do it from the union buildings instead.
Last minute shift.
But he
And
was.
then they're not even afraid to say it. Like they're not even, no skin on their face. Will say,
You're joking.
we're moving due to
Jesus.
Texas strike, violence, wara.
And he was in Cape
Like
Town on
what?
Sunday, you told me, to watch the
Yeah,
net.
he was at the
He was there to
netball.
watch the netball, but he can't stay
Yeah, because
for...
the netball is like at the ICC.
It's safe. It's in the safe part of town.
Guys. You do you remember what's his name? Zeku. Was it Zeku who was at the Zondo Commission? His main testimony, and there's a little clip that every now and again does the rounds on social media where he says, Siseka Keni. As in, we are in the twang. Yeah, but
Yeah.
there you go.
That shocked face. I'm
and-
so shocked. Where's
Wena.
my iPad? I don't
was
know
like,
where I've left my iPad. Someone has
shocking.
stolen my iPad. What a ridiculous,
Shocking
what a ridiculous
violence.
guy. I mean, he really is. Who would have guessed that post Zuma we would have found that there are new depths that we can, I mean, really, right?
I didn't have to guess.
No, you didn't have to guess.
At every moment
You
when
said
I
it.
get the
I know.
chance.
And I give you the chance to say every time I told you so, because it's a good thing to let people know when they were wrong. Oh, listen, in the Burning Platform later on, a lot of people will be very excited to hear from Anthea Jeffery, who's written this book, Countdown to Socialism, which is an interesting and brilliant and quite simple, easy to read exploration of what the ANC's
explanations.
and of what the ANC's real policies are, what they're actually trying to do. Because it seems to a lot of people like they just fumble and bumble and fall left and right, and they don't really know what's going on. You're like a cartoon villain who just keeps screwing up. But there is, or there used to be, a plan, and we'll ask her all about that. And the effects of their, in inverted commas, plan can be felt all over the economy today. So if you're wondering why, this may give an explanation that you're looking for.
On Tuesday this is also why I hate holidays that are in the middle of the week. I had 8 meetings on Tuesday, and so I left the office and thought I was going to go back to the office. So I don't have my book here with all my notes, and I'm so irritated. But
It's all right, you'll remember.
But on Tuesday afternoon, and he's been on the show with us before, Mr. Mweletsi Mbeki.
Yes.
He was one of the last meetings I had.
Oh, yeah?
Which is always, the meetings always last so much longer than they're supposed to, because first you spend 30 minutes kind of going on about everything that's happening.
And he's so well informed. Knows exactly what's happening.
And extremely articulate about it too. So it was quite a fascinating conversation, and he opened my mind to some things that I also wanted to chat about in the book. I can't wait.
Okay, good. So Anthea will be joining us later on, Anthea Jeffery. We'll also be talking to the Mayor of Cape Town, but that's all in the Burning Platform a little bit later on. We've got other things that we have to get to, and if you have just risen from your slumber to take on Thursday and Friday, Well, the good news is it's going to be over before you know it. I mean, that's the problem with these 2-day mini weeks, is that you can't really get too much done. And you know what people say when if you haven't put in place the things that you want to do for the rest of the year by August, forget about it. It's going to be very difficult to get people to do anything. And I hate that kind of talk, because I'm the sort of person who still has faith. I believe, like, oh no, people will make the effort. They'll plan ahead. They'll think about next year. They'll start looking at budgets and moving things. It is my experience that is a much more difficult thing to achieve than it seems.
And also, I think people have also just ground to a halt. And people are. This is what's awful about August. It's just we're over the winter. It's too far away from summer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the sun comes up later. It's dry and dreary and windy. And
all right,
dusty.
stop. You make me even more depressed. But there is something that you wanted to bring up. I mean, this fear mongering that keeps going on the internet about all kinds of things. The world's going to end. These climate change people who are in tears. I mean, I saw the headline in the Evening Standard, and I put this on Instagram. I was like, what the hell is going on in this world? Let me just find it so I don't get it wrong, because you cannot believe what this is. The Evening Standard, which is a supposedly serious publication, right?
Yeah.
Here they are. It says here, "Who will stop the world from burning?" And it's got a picture of Joe Biden, Xi of China, Modi of India, and Rishi Sunak. And like, what childish, hysterical nonsense is this? I mean, they must have an editor who's 9 years old with mental health problems. Who will stop the earth from burning? What is this? That is the kind of hysteria you're talking about.
I'm asking myself, is this what we all love? Humans, do we just yearn for that kind of stuff? Is that why it's everywhere? I mean,
this is the way they say. Look, I understand they're trying to sell newspapers. They're trying to
is that what we want?
By making people afraid, you get them to buy your rubbish.
Is that what we want?
Yeah.
No,
they pay
that's
attention.
Not what we want.
No, because you know what happens, Phumi? Despite the fact that higher brain function, you're trying to be positive and optimistic and fill your day with motivated thoughts and get things right and make things happen and all that stuff. I get that. But your reptile brain in the middle, all of our reptile brains respond immediately with that fight or flight mechanism whenever we hear bad news. So bad news has a way of rising to the top in our general focus. If you're not really paying attention, that stuff like that and all the other hysteria that you see on the internet is all that we pay attention to. It frustrates you, I can tell.
I hate it.
I know.
Like on any given day. Yesterday I saw something about something we all do in the shower that could like lead to heart attacks. I was like,
oh no.
Heart attack in the shower. What?
No.
Are they trying to stop people from showering? It's enough that I had to find out that people only shower wash the top halves of their body and not like the extended.
Is that what they said? Is this what they told you?
Do you not remember with Sia? Sia's the one that told me that. I'm still horrified. I've never forgotten it. But I was just like, what in the world?
Yeah, but people, they also, you see people, they talk about bad stuff straight away, right? So even I had a little family lunch yesterday, and we don't sit and talk about negative stuff. I mean, we try really hard not to, because it gets you into a spiral. You don't want to be there. And I like being happy. I'm happy, right? And I want to be happy. So I was having a nice lazy day yesterday. Woke up late, and it wasn't actually a bad day. It was quite a lovely day. There's a bit of wind, but it wasn't horrible. So good food, family. Who could possibly have a problem with that? And we started talking about all kinds of family things. My parents and my brother and his kids are all going to, they're going away at the end of this week, which is nice. All on
because it's school holidays.
School holidays.
I know.
Right?
I have a spreadsheet.
And so they were talking about their plans for that, and that was nice and happy. And someone brought up how they'd watched a documentary, which you watched, about homelessness in America. And suddenly this becomes the topic of conversation. Now, I mean, I've known about this because I follow these stories in the news as they come up. There was a really interesting clip from some TikToker that someone sent me, complaining because she walked out of her house in San Francisco and some homeless guy behind her while she was walking home with her groceries said, "Get out of the way, you bitch," and then spat in her face. And, because like these homeless people on like whatever they're on. And apparently there's an app. This is true. There's an app which traces the amount of fecal matter that is left in the streets of San Francisco because people shit everywhere, right? This is, by the way, this is the capital.
In America.
This is the capital of like tech, right?
In America.
Right. You got Silicon Valley just down the road. You've got all these, some of the most expensive property in the US as well. San Francisco, famously, it's always been very expensive to live in, rent or buy. But they have this app that tells you where the dirtiest streets are. They have like almost like when you open up Google Maps, it's got those little red tags everywhere. Well, they have these brown things. So when they launched it, there was so much shit in San Francisco. The whole city just looked like one big shit.
Maybe we should just make the world burn. Maybe we should just all let it burn. Like, what?
But this woman is voting for a government which clearly doesn't believe in punishing crime, in sorting out homelessness, and then she complains about it. She's
Gareth,
like, "I can't believe this happened. I'm literally shaking."
Okay,
she goes, "I'm literally shaking."
Let me just say this documentary, which isn't long.
Tell me about it because I haven't seen it.
I can't remember what it's called,
Mm.
but it's both horrifying and at the same time so, like, I don't know, the world and humanity. I think this is the lowest point of humanity, because it's not also the homeless people in this particular documentary. I think they follow 3 characters.
Oh yeah.
And one of the ladies lives in her car, and she has a job, and she works 7 days a week. 7 days a week.
How's she homeless?
She's a cleaner and a caregiver. So she looks after one of the people that she looks after. I think she looks after a couple of people. She just can't afford the rent. She sleeps. So there's a parking lot, and there's a whole lot of people that sleep in this parking lot. One of whom was a computer technician, because San Francisco, right? And he lost his job because he got ill. He got something with his heart, whatever. Couldn't work. Could only get unemployment benefits for 6 months, and after that, has lost everything. Couldn't afford the healthcare. I mean, it's horrifying. You're watching this. This woman has a decent enough car. It's like one of those kind of Avanza type cars. So it's big enough. She's got a space she makes the back seat, all of that, and all her stuff. And she has a gym membership because that's where she showers. And if you were to meet her on her way to work, you would not know that she is homeless.
What city is she in?
San Francisco.
Yeah.
And then they also, so they have San Francisco and they have LA, and then they have a rural town that they go to as well. Matt, in this rural town, they once a year have a field hospital where people drive for hours to come to this field hospital. It looks like a war zone in America.
That's the thing. This is America. This
40
is supposed
million.
to be,
So this,
40 million
to this
people are homeless.
Not homeless, but live under the breadline.
Okay.
40 million Americans.
Because
what?
I mean, in San Fran, for example, is another video that was doing the rounds last week, which I mean, I thought it was terrific, but a lot of people won't. This guy who's clearly high on something walks into a store, and in places like San Francisco, the prosecutors have decided they won't prosecute any crime under $90 of shoplifting, right? So basically, it means there's just lawlessness. People will go in and just steal whatever they need, and they just walk out with impunity. So this guy walks in, and the shop owner, who's like a Sikh guy, right? He's got the turban and everything on. He's trying to run the shop. He says, don't do that. The guy goes, fuck you, man, or whatever. He walks up to the cigarette thing. He starts pouring cigarettes into his trolley like this, literally from the back, pushing all the cigarettes, just letting them fall off the shelf into the trolley. This guy goes, don't do that, please. Don't steal. Guy's like, fuck you, man. So they come at him with broomsticks. They take this guy and they beat him. This is in America again. They beat this guy. They beat this guy on the legs and on the back and on the sides with a stick. And he's going, oh, stop, man. Because suddenly now there's a bit of retaliation. You know what they're doing? They're prosecuting the shop owner.
But there's also crazy things. And this is where I'm just like, this must be humanity's lowest point, right? Because there's also crazy things like you can't it's against the law to rummage in the dustbins. Municipal so you don't have food, but it's against the law to beg.
But where is in places like San Francisco?
Yeah. This
really,
like this whole thing was just, and then this is the funniest part in this whole documentary. In the midst of all this mayhem, craziness, there's a church that runs a thing. You remember the CEO sleep out that we used to have here, right? So there's a church that runs something similar. 24, I think it's a 24-hour like experience of homelessness. So you come to the church and in the backyard and people sleep outside and they get, you're given your nice clothes and you get like, and for 24 hours you have to, and in the second part of it, after the sleep out, they then have to go out and look for food, but they have no money.
Right.
And you can't ask people to give, because it's illegal to beg. You can't rummage in the bins because it's illegal to rummage in the bins. And this one lady, this quite big lady, it's like, I'm fat and I could never be homeless. I'm a middle-aged fat person that could never do this. That was very funny.
Well, of course, the other thing that no one talks about is you're obviously in this documentary, they must have focused on these different people, but the one that you cited, the example of the woman in her car, she's obviously someone who, for economic reasons, that's the minority, right? The majority of homeless people have serious mental health problems. In
this particular documentary, because they go to where she stays and whatever, there are quite a lot of people who simply, one other person that they talk to is a woman who actually, because they also talk about evictions and how easy it is to evict people. So if your rent is late by 5 days or whatever, how easy it is to evict people. A woman who has lived in this apartment, I think for 5 years, and then she's lost her job and she falls behind and she comes home and she's been evicted. She gets an eviction notice and then she comes home and she's been, the locks are changed. So now tonight she's going to sleep in her car, right? And if she doesn't come and pick up her stuff, all her stuff that's in the apartment within 24 hours.
They just leave it on the street.
No, they're going to move it to the dump and they're going to send her the bill.
Jesus. They move it to the dump.
Nina.
That's what they do. Wow.
It's like,
but you are aware of the fact that there are vast numbers of homeless people who are not homeless for economic situations. They're homeless because, and in places like LA, they're actually renting out hotels. The government is paying, the state government in those places is paying for homeless people to live in hotels. It takes about 15 minutes for these homeless people to get into those hotels and wreck the place.
Oh my God, wait. There's
they
also
shit on the bed. They break the TV. The air conditioning unit pulls off the wall.
And, and I think I get that. I can see a lot of people who, they have a serious drug problem in many states in America.
Massive.
There is also a guy who lives in a 10 square meter apartment with his girlfriend.
10 square meters.
And every second weekend,
the studio is bigger than that.
His kids come for the weekend, and they all and he's a work, and she's a working person, and they. I mean, the cost of housing.
Yeah, but also America's cities are just being mismanaged in every way. In every way. The cities have all got these Democrat mayors and Democrat governors, and they all mismanaged. It is horribly difficult to live in some American cities. Chicago, have you ever heard about the violence going on there?
One of the rural town that they go to is a Republican state. And they have a whole conversation with these people, and they go to people who live in, what do they call them? These like trailer parks.
Yeah.
So they live in the trailer
motorhomes, but they're trailer parks. Yeah.
Yeah. But and this, guys, you have to. I don't know. I'm gonna remember what the documentary is called, and I'll maybe tweet what the documentary is. But my God, everything about it. And look, this was by way of good filmmaking. This is not what this documentary is. I just want you to know, it's made by a French guy. But the content is so compelling, right? Because it's dispassionate. He is not
human stories, but it's not
he's
told
not making
sympathetically.
He's not making a political statement. He's not making he's not making a plea of any kind. He's just showing this.
But it is frightening. So that's a problem America have, and that's a country where the economy is not in the toilet like ours is.
Listen, the one woman says, we have our unemployment here is next to zero. Anybody that wants a job can get a job. But it doesn't matter if you have a job and you can't pay for a place to stay, and you can't pay for healthcare, and you can't, that is, what is the point of the fucking job?
Yeah.
What is the point of the fucking job?
No, you're right. I mean, it does make me think.
If you're working 7 days a week, like what kind of life? You are going to end up with mental problems. If you cannot take a day off to rest and recoup and, fuck.
7 days a week. No, that's hectic. That's very
And
hectic.
you still can't afford a place to stay. What kind of rubbish life is that?
So, in other words, we do have real things to worry about, but they're not the aliens or the heart attack you're going to have in the shower or the climate change.
Because you haven't washed your toes.
Yeah. But I mean, it is interesting that America's got these problems. They've got enormous amounts of money, but they don't solve domestic problems. They are giving it to Ukraine. Very interesting. Anyway, there's a story about our friend Cyril Ramaphosa, the president.
Of course there is.
He did manage to sneak in a line about condemning the violence and destruction that has characterized the deadly taxi protest in Cape Town. He said he was
safely from the union buildings.
Yeah, he said he was troubled by this.
Safely from the union buildings.
Yeah. 35 people been arrested since last week, and a few people have died already. We've heard a story just this morning that a British doctor who was in Cape Town and took a wrong turn because Google told him to go through a certain neighborhood. He didn't know he was going through a dangerous neighborhood. He was killed. Can you imagine? You're relying on like Waze or Google to help you through, and
Waze, Waze will take you through people's backyards to get you because
right.
When they made it, where they made it, and when they made it, they don't have the same.
Well, I mean, if anyone was listening, the president did say, we strongly condemn the violence and destruction. We're appalled by the killings. I just get the feeling like so much of this is, he's like, oh, I suppose I have to say something, right?
Have you noticed the language that our president uses?
No, what do you mean?
He often, it's always a collective. We.
Oh, yeah.
That he speaks about, right?
Yes.
We do that.
But that's an ANC tradition.
Except for when he has to take responsibility for being part of the collective in the 9 wasted years.
Oh, yeah, then it's I. That's a good point. But the ANC has a long tradition of whenever anything goes wrong, it's we.
I'm
never forget. Remember when Alec Irwin was the Minister of Public Enterprises and Eskom was starting to flounder? Do you remember him? And he started saying this we, and no one is actually to blame as a collective. And I was like, yeah. This is how people who have no personal accountability talk. You can see it, right? Anyway, let's move on. We'll get to the politicians
Are we doing
later.
news?
We're doing some news,
now?
yeah.
Okay.
So there's a new state-owned company coming to South Africa. Are you excited about this?
And very quietly,
Yeah.
Minister Pravin Gordhan has
What?
Approved the sale of Eskom assets to this new state-owned enterprise.
Oh, no, I'm talking about a different one.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about a different one. This has got to do with water.
Of course.
Because they've ruined electricity, now they're going to ruin water. So the Department of Water and Sanitation wants to create a state-owned company as the infrastructure is starting to collapse. The department's latest Blue Drop Watch report noted that the quality of South Africa's drinking water is disastrous. The report said only 38% of water systems achieved excellent microbiological quality, while 11% received good. Therefore, 51% of South Africa's drinking water, Phumi, 51% of our drinking water has poor or bad microbiological quality. Of course, we all know about Hammanskraal and the cholera, remember? It was just a few months ago. In addition, the report said 71% of plants did not achieve chemical compliance levels. That's the plants where we process our water, with only 16% and 14% having excellent and good water quality, respectively. So just get ready, everybody. I'm going to say this now. And again, not to depress you, because we don't like bad news. But on a Thursday morning, it's probably a good idea, if you are thinking about your health and your children's health and your future, to install some sort of water filter in your home. Right?
So, and
I mean, these are the results from the Department of Water. So they're looking to make it seem as favorable as possible. And they're telling us 51%, a majority of the water in this country has poor or bad microbiological quality.
So somebody in the comments, the Hood Shed, has just put up a thing about the Ecuadorian presidential candidate. And I've just gone to look for it, because it's not so much of a breaking news story, but no one's talking about it a lot just yet. Has been assassinated, shot 3 times in the head, and there's a video of it.
Oh my God. Okay, well, that's in Ecuador, which is less of a problem to me than our drinking water. Have you got like some sort of filter at home?
No.
And you think about getting one?
I don't, and only at the office, because our office is here in Rosebank. And there's been lots of water issues over the past couple of months here in this area, in the Rosebank kind of Illovo area. So at the office we get water. At home, I've had really good water for.
No, they've always said that Joburg water has been one of the best in the world,
I can't afford to get a water filter.
You're gonna have to. You're gonna have to. I'm sorry. This is because when governments screw up, it's up to us individually to look after ourselves. And of course, what it means
to get a water filter, guys. I keep telling you, I have a 15-year-old son to feed.
I know, and you are not the only
everything.
one. Trust me. So, according to the Government Gazette, the draft National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency Water Bill is heading to Parliament. The draft bill calls for the creation of the South African National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency Limited as a state-owned company. So that's going to be another big bureaucratic organization that we're going to establish to take care of water. But of course, it's actually just another way of creating jobs inside of government that no one will do any work.
Listen, my brain can't keep up. My brain can't keep up with all of these additional things. We literally in the past 8 days, we've now had to go and read like the Land Transport Act so we can understand what the fuck is going on in Cape Town. Now I must go read about water.
So as Bakabantu says in the comments, Bakabantu says, so they're making a new company to take over from the failing water company. Yes, correct. That's exactly right. Spot on. Sianda says, sure, we need to bring back necklacing to deal with these politicians.
Hi, guys. Again, another low point in our humanity.
Slippery Pickle says, our water passes its hepatitis test with flying colors. It gets an A, B, and a C. You got to admit. South Africans will find a way to laugh at anything, right?
I'm telling you, it's our trauma response.
Oh, my God.
Our trauma response is laughing.
Yeah. And then somebody, one of my friends said this to me yesterday, Sugarman, Rodriguez.
So I saw that on Nick Headley's Twitter, and I was
I thought Rodriguez had died a while ago. Honestly, I wonder how many times you've been had, and I wonder.
I wouldn't have known who that guy is if it hadn't been for that Finding Sugar Man.
Yes, brilliant documentary. You talk about good documentaries.
Good documentary. I wouldn't have known. I was like, ooh, you know what is a good documentary that I saw?
What?
Wham.
Oh, I've heard this is superb. Somebody else watched it and said to me, it is just one of the most brilliant. So George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley and the whole story of how they got together.
Listen, everybody needs a friend like Andrew.
Apparently he was the most tremendous guy. I heard a lovely story. Did I tell you about how someone backstage at a concert said to George Michael, it was some guy in a boy band, said to George Michael, I want to be like the George Michael. So he was. People always ask George Michael, how do you go do a solo career after you've been in a boy band? Because effectively that's what Wham was. But this guy came up to him and said, how do I end up being the Andrew Ridgeley of, solo artists? And of course he meant it as a joke. And George Michael said to him, don't you ever mock Andrew Ridgeley in my presence again. And walked away from him.
Listen,
total loyalty to the end.
You need a friend like that. After I watched that thing, I was just like, this guy and I mean, it's not like he's poor wherever he is.
No, sure.
He hasn't become a povo.
No, a povo. A povo.
He still has all of, he still gets all of his royalties and all of that.
No.
But
they say he's worth about 40 million.
He is, but he was just understood that his biggest role is being here, and he's very prominent in this documentary because they speak to both him and George.
Mm-hmm.
And he just says, this, even when he saw George, his whole thing, they started the band so they could write songs.
Mm-hmm.
And when he saw George's songwriting come into its own, he got it. He was just like, this is a friend like that.
Oh, wow.
Who can be like, yeah, this thing, we started this thing together, but this thing is more you than it is me.
And Siobhan says, Andrew Ridgeley's the most generous and selfless human being.
He is, Baba.
It's amazing.
He is very nice.
So Tracy says she found a Rodriguez tape in her dad's old army trunk, late 80s. Felt like an absolute rebel because none of my friends knew about the music. We were all listening to Kylie, Rick, and Jennifer. Yeah, Sugar Man. Wow. Great song. One of my friends posted something last night on our friends group about Rodriguez, but I was already tired, so I went to bed and didn't read it. It happens. This is an amazing story too, because I think here Carl says, just as a rebuke to you, Phumi, I installed a water filter 5 years ago already. How are we trusting the ANC with water? It's just ridiculous and naive. I've got a thing. So I've got one tap in my kitchen that is connected to one of those filters, but it's not some industrial thing. It's just, it filters it through sand and, it just cleans out all the big stuff. But I don't know what else is in there. I've got a lab. I should test my water.
Should we get the app that tells us about the fecal content?
Yes, I think we should. Obi Sedgefield, gem of our garden route, I love that.
Hey,
says Rand Water a few years back was highly rated. This is a scam to fence off funds. These guys have run it all to potable water. They'll use anything to steal from our people. Water is very sensitive. Yeah, I don't know, but I just don't want. I love drinking water. It's all I drink. Right when I'm at home, I drink nothing else. Nothing else. I promise you, I have bottles of water in my fridge because I like it cold, and I fill it from that filtered tap that I was telling you about now. And I drink water morning, noon, and night.
I'm not a big fan of water, but we already spoke about me and the soda stream. And the soda stream has made the water much better.
I've got a surprise for you. SodaStream brought you a present. Don't leave. Yeah.
Rena sent me a message. I was so excited. I've been so excited.
Because you were talking about it. You were so excited when we were talking about it the other day. And they said you must not be adding that horrible stuff you're adding. So they've sent a whole bunch of flavors for you to try as well. Yeah.
But what the SodaStream also does is it makes your fizzy water. So even if you don't have the flavorants, it makes fizzy water, which it makes it so much easier for me to drink water. I hate drinking water.
But do you like fizzy water?
I like fizzy water.
Okay, all right. Well, if that's what you need to do.
I like my water fizzy rather than just like straight up.
Okay.
When I'm sick, I'll drink like water. But
so Slippery Pickle says you need the UV filter and a three-stage.
Yeah, one
3x3 stage filtration system. The poo to drinking water one. That's what you need. Oof.
Uyayibona yiyo ke into engingayifuni zonke this. Zonke this that we're talking about right now. Because guys, I'm telling you now, there is no way to stretch my rand
Any further.
in fact, right now, I feel like I'm stretching 15 cents into a rand.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of, I'm like stretching my 15 cents. Hey, man.
Not just you. Beth says, I love mixing fizzy water with fruit juice. Very popular in Germany.
Yeah, bo. Fizzy water, it's a thing, guys.
Okay. My friend has a son who's, I think he's 4 or 5 now. He calls it fart water. when it has bubbles in it, it's fart water. All right. So much other stuff to get into this morning. All right. So
it's got no farts.
So do you want to hear a story from Neuralink? Because we're always looking at amazing things. And last week we discovered something truly phenomenal, that they are starting to now make implants into people's heads that are allowing people who've been paralyzed to feel that part of their body again and to walk and to move
it.
Yeah. So Elon Musk's Neuralink has just got another 5.3 billion rand in funding. So they've raised $280 million in new funding to develop their technology. The startup announced the funding round in a post on X, which is what we are meant to call Twitter now. The deal was led by Founders Fund, a venture capital firm backed by billionaire Peter Thiel. Neuralink is best known as a massive player in a growing field of brain technology. Partly spurred on by Neuralink's high profile, investors have backed dozens of other startups exploring similar technology. So apparently this is a very big fundraise. It also compares to 278.1 million that they raised in 2022 and 518.9 million US dollars in 2021. So they're busy starting to do these clinical trials. They are developing small devices that use electrode-laced wires to link the brain to a computer. Placing the device requires drilling into the skull, which is, I mean, that's amazing. Have you ever seen they do this when people are totally wide awake?
Yeah, they have to, so that they can see that they haven't fucked up anything.
Correct.
Also, Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, is that what you found out about that? But I mean, it is phenomenal to me. I mean, you very early technology, surgery in this case, they used to stimulate certain parts of the brain. People's arms would go up like this if you hit the certain part of the brain where the motor neurons are.
In the leg. Very exciting.
I think that they're two right next to each other. There's the sensory and then the motor for pretty much the whole body. And if you take a little needle and you just poke in the right place, gives you a shooting pain in your arm, for example, or just a little bit further on, this arm suddenly goes like this. It's wild.
I love it. So speaking of Elon and Neuralink, something that I've been thinking about kind of between 2 and 3 in the morning when I'm not sleeping is watching Elon Musk almost kind of 24/7 on X and how he behaves and what he tweets and his style of management in the business. I have been thinking about if this is Elon Musk performatively being Elon Musk, or if is this what people deal with in the boardroom at Tesla? And
I think he's like this all the time.
whole
Stream
time.
of consciousness. Yeah. It's hard work. I don't think it's easy to be around him.
And every time I think about it, it absolutely scares me. But I think the thing that's scaring me just a little bit more is the fact that there are many, many young people who are wanting to get into business and want to be entrepreneurs and who are learning this like completely demented way of managing business. And this is going to be, I'm telling you guys, humanity is at its lowest point.
Well,
we're going to have a proliferation of like brat CEOs in the next couple of years.
But hasn't that always been the case?
No.
We've always had brat CEOs. No?
No.
You don't think so?
CEOs used to be like Jack Walsh. They used to be old men who were measured. And
I wonder how many people want to work for someone like Elon. Because we were joking with Stan Katz, who was in here on Tuesday, right?
Who was also
He was a bit of a brat CEO.
He was in like
He was in entertainment.
business.
Sure, of course.
So he had to be a brat. But if you're like Jack Walsh at,
General
GE,
Electric, yeah.
you had to be a grown-up. You had to be in a grey suit.
Ricky says, I don't think it's hard to work for him. He's just super smart and he's used to working 16 hours a day.
Yeah, a lot of us work 16 hours a day, but we're not like...
Patrick says, he may be crazy, but he's dealing with the woke. Has negatives, but I think he's ultimately a net positive. I think, Elon, remember the movie The Fly Man? He morphs into a giant fly. Scary stuff. Yeah, listen, I think people get addicted to Twitter. And I mean, for a long time, I was. The best thing you can do is get off of Twitter because it's taking up a lot of our time. And I don't think people need to spend as much time as they do on there. It's not good for you. It just isn't. I honestly have had a much happier life since I don't go on Twitter. Things are so much easier. I'm occupying a parallel universe to all these people who are constantly, you said earlier, like you're sick of all this like constant worry and people telling you that you need to be concerned about this and concerned about that. If I asked you where you get most of that information and you honestly answer, it's probably Twitter.
Yeah, no. So it's everywhere, right? It's the internet. It's the internet. It's whether it's Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, it's the internet. But this is what I'm saying, right? Is that's why I'm wondering if this is a performative, because we also understand that. We also understand that all these social media platforms are places for people to perform and project particular types.
I think he's really like that. I think he's like that all the time. And I think that's why he's been as successful as he is. But it doesn't mean he's easy to work for. I disagree with whoever it was who said they'd rather work for him. I don't think he's easy to work for, but I think he's interesting to work for.
So I didn't hear the interview with Stan.
Yeah.
What was Stan?
So what we were talking about was just how things used to be before, there were big HR departments and, essentially, like it was a bit more like the Wild West. It wasn't so corporatized. Your CEO could, first of all, you could have drinks on a Friday with people at work, and it wasn't an invitation to all kinds of shit. These days,
when I started in advertising, it was practically a dope system.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And people would, like, for example, if you quite fancied some girl at the office, you could make a move without being fired or without being reprimanded by HR. You can't do that anymore. Now the office is all serious all the time. And that's just the fun side of things. There's also you could fire people. Like someone could he was talking about, because Aki was here with him, and he just said he probably fired Aki 12 times.
And yet Aki out-survived him.
Yeah, correct. But I mean, those were the days where you could do that. And I think in a company like the ones that Elon runs, SpaceX, Tesla, now X, he seems to be the kind of guy who just fires people left, right, and hires people all the time. And if you can last long and you can make it work, you can make lots of money. But if you don't, then tough titties. It's a tough environment. It's not a pleasant place to work.
It is a bit of a Wild West.
I think that's the way to look at it. So I think, would I want to work for him? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Imagine Elon just closes Twitter and takes out some patent copyright or interdict that nobody's allowed to create a similar platform. Some politicians would lose their mind. Well, look at how we've become so adapted to needing all this information all the time. We all check it before we go to sleep at night, when we wake up in the morning. That's the unhealthy thing. And it's us. It's not the company.
Yeah, but
it's us. If you have the strength to not do this.
Listen, our parents used to be like that with their media platforms, right? They'd get up and turn on the radio or turn on the Good Morning South Africa.
Remember that? Remember that? What was that thing they used to do with Good Morning South Africa, where they'd have those people doing aerobics in the morning? That's it.
I don't know what the song said, but body beat. Body beat.
They used to do that. People in leg warmers. first thing in the morning,
doing pelvic lifts.
Aerobics. I mean, can you imagine? And the whole of South Africa is doing this at home. Beat Boys.
No one was
Get
doing
that perfect
it.
Beat Boy.
They were just watching.
What an incredible world. All right, so I mentioned this when we were talking about Madeira on Tuesday. We spoke about going on holiday to Madeira.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the cake. Anyway.
Oh, no.
Who's going on holiday to Madeira?
So we had someone from travel.co.za pop in to tell us about Madeira, which I didn't know was a travel destination that was affordable. And, for South Africans, it's a real option. And it sounds like a really cool place. So we mentioned the Cristiano Ronaldo statue, which is the worst statue in the world. And someone found a picture of this. Ryan found a picture of it for us.
Oh, my God.
It is so bad. So just
looks
take
like
a look.
They asked Rasta to make it.
So it's probably one of the worst statues I've ever seen. And poor old Cristiano Ronaldo, apparently he has it in his museum over there. So if you want to see it, then that's where it is. But I'm glad Ryan found us a picture of that.
I did not. So HML says, "Beat the body, beat boy." Was that the lyric?
No, it was. Oh man!
All I remember is
I remember you just got it right. You got that right, but I don't know that. That's
I just remember the body beats.
Yeah, Rebellious Ruth says, and the cartoons before 7 a.m. eating cereal in front of the TV. That's right. They used to have kids' cartoons. It was a proper variety show. Huh? That's what it was. Early in the morning. All right. The only thing that is similar is the Adam's apple in the Cristiano Ronaldo.
Show the statue again.
Okay, let's take a look again. See if
now that you've said the Adam's apple.
Yeah, that's the only thing that's right. Everything else is terrible. But the Adam's apple, they seem to have got correct.
Those eyes are so close. What is this like a bronze bust of some sort?
It's so bad.
Oh.
Someone commissioned it, and then when it arrived, everyone was just too polite to say, "Take this, shove it up your ass." That moment you fart and you realize
the guy
that
from the Goonies, yes, it does look like the guy from the Goonies, like a thin version of the guy.
That's
from
right.
The Goonies.
Good point. Absolutely. All right. It looks like Ronaldo's brother, who's been hidden from the world like the guy in the Goonies. That's even better an explanation. And Phil Joffe was the body beat guy. Is that right?
I have no idea.
Phil Joffe. I'm not sure because this is a long time ago. I mean, you're tapping into my childhood memories.
It's childhood memories, yo. It's childhood
Good morning,
memories,
South
yeah.
Africa. Wow, Phumi,
Good morning.
It's always this super happy. Good morning, South Africa. Yeah, there was a jingle and everything.
The point being that even our old people, they were addicted to information. They'd wake up in the morning and turn that thing on and it would have news every 30 minutes.
So they were addicted. That was their Twitter.
That was their Twitter. They just couldn't talk back.
And a good thing it was. A good thing, because all we've had since people could talk back is...
There is a cacophony of jabberings at that corner. Please come to silence.
A cacophony of jabberings. That's what we've had since we've opened it up.
But this too was the brilliance of what 702 did, right?
Yeah,
because they were among the very first people that got South Africans talking.
Yes.
But
I say it's a mistake. I maintain it is a mistake.
I am man.
I've got a very funny video of how coalition government might work when our next election rolls around. Do you want to see? Okay, so we'll explain afterwards for the people who are listening on podcast. But it's a little video that it kind of explains how coalitions might work.
What is that
it's
animal?
Basically, so it's a goat. There's a little baby goat. Yeah, those are goats. And what they're doing is they're all taking a turn, jumping on the bucket, and then pushing each other off. Because goats like to climb up to the highest place. So these little goats, one is on the thing, and then one knocks the other one off. Other one knocks the other one off, and so on and so on and so on.
I love that.
Mm.
I love that.
That's
Those
how
are is that what baby goats
baby
look
goats,
like?
they're very cute, but goats are terrible animals. Terrible animals.
Gareth, let me tell
The
you.
worst.
Let me just, as a person who drives around rural areas in this country, goats are very smart. They're not like sheep, okay? Goats can see the car coming and get out of the way.
Yeah.
The sheep,
Yes.
they just like talk about
No,
a
I don't-
yabbering of jabberings. The sheep, you can't even like chase
Yeah.
them out of the way.
All right, but
Goats are very smart.
Are the most destructive creatures. They ruin. You know why we've got so much dusty, arid land in this country? It's because of goats. They eat the bark off the trees. They strip everything on the ground until it is ruined.
So
They pull out everything by the roots. They are destructive little things, and they must all be put down. All of them.
what I do hate about goats, y'all know I'm from Soweto.
Yeah.
And over the past couple of years,
Yeah.
there is a proliferation of people keeping goats.
Mm.
If ever I ran for like
Mhm.
local government, that would be my one thing in Soweto. Would just be get rid of the goats.
I'm telling you, you're so you are on my side.
Those goats. No, I'm just saying. But those goats, again, to show you how smart the goats are. The goats in the Logishi Baba, they know how to get out of the way of the taxis.
And let me tell you, that's something that most motorists haven't learned.
They see that taxi coming and they know how to like duck and duck. And
Negotiate. They should be negotiating for Santaco in Cape Town. That's what should be happening. All right. Just a quick thing. I did see a couple of comments about this, and we have had some problems with our app recently. So Elise says she's having some trouble with the app. We are aware of it and we are working on it. Obviously, what happens is every time iOS or the Google software updates, the Android software updates, we have to redo the app, basically. Okay. And it's just got to a point now where the whole thing is having trouble, particularly on certain devices. So we're aware of it, we are working on it, and we hopefully will have an answer for you ASAP. So just to let you know.
Listen, the people in the comments, the peanut gallery there in the comments has gone down a deep rabbit hole of South Africa in like 90s, 80s. People are talking
because
about
of you bringing up,
yeah,
because of you bringing up Good Morning South Africa. Oh yeah.
People are going in, they are in a rabbit hole. Good luck to y'all for the rest of the day. Because this is now you're in the rabbit hole. Now you're Googling to check, and now you're good thing these things aren't on Wikipedia.
No, but you know what I did it this weekend? Quickly before we go to 7 o'clock break, I was trying to remember what the shopping center was called in Sandton. We were talking about one of my friends coming up from PE and wanted to go somewhere for dinner. So I said, "Well, let's go," and I gave a couple of options. And then another friend who's joining us said, "Oh, I haven't been there for ages. What does it look like?" So I found pictures. You know where the Mark is now?
Yes.
Right. Opposite Nedbank's HQ and kind of on Rivonia Road.
Yes.
The Mark.
When it used to be called Village Walk.
Yes. And I found a picture of the old Village Walk, which used to be our stomping ground, right? Because when I was at Prime Media, we were there.
It's right across from
Right.
Prime
and there
Media.
used to be the Balalaika.
Balalaika Hotel.
Right. So I found all these pictures and I was getting all nostalgic. So these rabbit holes are real.
And this is the thing about the internet, right? The rabbit holes. I've even now got the Wikipedia app. I am often thrown down a rabbit hole. I'm trying to do my work, minding my business. Woo.
You know,
on those days when you can distract me with a balloon.
It doesn't feel like that long ago that the Village Walk was there instead of the Mark, right? And when you see pictures of how the Sandton skyline has changed, it's actually quite scary. It's not that long ago. And
okay,
now,
you're gonna have to put it on Twitter later.
All right, I will. So the Sandton Times even just replied to us and said the Village Walk. I would love to see someone publish a book of photographs of Johannesburg then and now. Just like 20 years ago. We're not talking 100 years ago, just 20 years ago, showing us what, places that have changed completely.
I wanted to do a thing like that with Kanejo
because
he brought me a book from the library, from his school library, because he knows how much I love my Soweto, which is kind of Soweto in the 80s.
Yeah.
All these just about the township. And so I took him on a little drive to show him all those places now. Love it.
See, this is good. All right, we'll be back in a moment or two. It's the Burning Platform on cliffcentral.com. Next, don't go anywhere. We've got Anthea Jeffery joining us, and we'll also have the Mayor of Cape Town talking about the ongoing strike there and an update, which I managed to record with him last night. So we were working on the public holiday. Don't you panic. Everybody, we don't shirk our responsibilities.
Your entertainment is our priority.
There we go.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
Or do you perceive a world where online click and deliver a car to somebody's house? I don't think it's entirely like going to get there. There's always going to be this level of fulfillment where the consumer has to go and fetch the car from a dealership. There has to be a demonstration, to walk through, signing of documents, all that stuff.
I think a lot of that can happen online or at the house, but I think the dealership is still vital to be able to be there before the sale.
Yeah.
The customer doesn't just want to look at the pictures; they want to touch and feel the car.
Yeah.
I think that's where the dealership will still be crucial in our strategy.
Yeah.
So we have no ideas to take away the dealerships. They'll be there to service the car.
Yeah.
The delivery can happen at the house, but or at the office. But I think to demo the car before, after the sale, and to have a relationship with the customer, I think they're still important.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
Bright sunny morning to a rainy day. We know that when it's rainy, you leave earlier because you're going to drive slower, and most probably you're going to come across an accident. And you know what? That means simply your risk of being in an accident is higher. Now, when you change hormone levels, the same applies. Whether it's hormones becoming too little or declining, or if you have an excess of hormones, that creates an imbalance which changes your risk profile. And I think that's something that we need to understand.
That was the T Health Show, empowering you with knowledge. Download all previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform. The T Health Show is brought to you by T Clinic.
It's time for the Burning Platform. This is our chance to catch up on all the important stories in South Africa and take a look at what we need to know from our politicians, from our business leaders, from the future, the past, all of these things, hugely important. We're joined this morning by Anthea Jeffery, who has been working steadily and very hard in the background on this excellent book, which is called Countdown to Socialism. I mean, you've been watching what's been happening in the ANC, as many of us have. I know Phumi has for years, but it's fascinating to me that so many people do not know anything about those three letters, NDR. A lot of people in South Africa go, "What's the NDR? Is that a political party?" Right? Am I right, Phumi?
Something to do with Nkosazana Zuma?
Yeah. Does it have something to do with NDZ, for example? Yeah, that's what people want to know. So, in this book, Anthea pretty much explains why we're in the situation we're in. Unemployment, infrastructure, EWC, the mining sector, all of these things, Anthea, you've looked at and you've pretty much written about why this has happened, how it's happened, and what the thinking behind it is. Now, how much thinking is still going on in the ANC, I don't know. But certainly in the beginning, this was always the plan, right?
Undoubtedly. the ANC has been committed to the NDR, the National Democratic Revolution, all the way back to the 1960s. And one might have thought that with the disbandment of the Soviet Union in 1991, shortly before our political transition, that would perhaps put an end to the NDR.
Yeah.
Because it was a Moscow-inspired strategy to take a newly independent country from a primarily capitalist to a socialist and ultimately communist economy. And having, with the evident failure of the Soviet Union, one would imagine that would have been it, that many people would have moved on from the socialist dream. But unfortunately, not so. And in South Africa itself, in 1989, just after the Berlin Wall came down, Joe Slovo, who was then the chair of the South African Communist Party, the SACP, asked the key question, has socialism failed?
Mm-hmm.
And he came to the conclusion that it hadn't. Why? Because it wasn't real socialism that had been implemented in the Soviet Union. Exactly.
Yeah.
What had happened to that what Moscow had done had been all bureaucratic and commandist and had some negative consequences, but real socialism hadn't yet been tried. And this became a kind of trope in many countries around the world, with many other socialist communist parties and left-leaning academics and commentators taking up the same view, that wherever socialism has been tried and has failed, that's simply because it's not real socialism, whereas we will get it right. And so that remains the goal.
So
the NDR is seen as offering the most direct route to get there.
All right, why this preoccupation with socialism and communism among those coteries that you've just described, the academics, the left-wing politicians, these idealists? Why that, first of all? And second of all, is there still a hysteria around this too, an overreaction from people who are worried about communism? Because I hear that often. I hear people, oh, why are you worried about communism? That's a thing that's over. And yet there is evidence all around us that it is not over. And you find these people using that as a convenient sort of cop-out to get you to stop talking about it, because it's actually something that they're still flirting with.
I think that's very so. And why the appeal to intellectuals? It's not something that I've ever really been able to understand. Friedrich Hayek wrote the book, The Fatal Conceit, many years ago. Why it appeals to politicians, I think, is clear to see. Because at the end of the day, if you have a socialist government with control over the economy, it's the main employer, it's the main landlord, it's the main facilitator of any kind of financial help or banking. It has a level of power that we can't imagine when we're in a primarily capitalist world. Because at the moment, there's a whole lot of entities and agencies involved in providing services like that. So having acquired this extraordinary degree of power, that does two things to the small elite up at the top. It makes them feel, obviously, that they have power of an unprecedented level, and they can start diverting resources to the benefit of the party, to the benefit of themselves. So it's extraordinary wealth as well.
And even if they're idealists and have some utopian idea, they think they can socially engineer things as well.
And they're doing this all for the benefit of the people.
Yeah. It comes from this idea that deep down inside they're tremendously noble.
Yes, indeed.
And they mean well.
They can feed the fantasy that they're doing a truly noble thing for the benefit of the people, even as their power and wealth endlessly expands. And the poverty in which the great mass of people is living, unfortunately, gets very much worse.
And, you talk about Joe Slovo, but I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about is the influence of the Communist Party over the ANC,
exactly,
which is primarily from its inception a nationalist party. And you also spoke about how it really from the 1960s, which was the reason for the breakaway that created the PAC, is really this influence of the Communist Party.
Exactly.
Do you think that the Communist Party in South Africa today still has that kind of its tentacles deep in the ANC? We know Pravin Gordhan comes from the Communist Party, and still quite a lot of influential politicians within the party come from the communist angle. Do you think that they have that louder voice over what we call our billionaire president?
Yes, indeed. And
who obviously cannot be a communist.
Obviously, yes.
Very few communists are actually communists,
They want the
practice
power, they
practice
want the wealth.
capitalism in their own world, but in the outside world they pretend communism.
They wear red
Yes.
socks.
Just to, one of the things that happened in Venezuela when it embraced 21st century socialism was that Hugo Chavez became one of the 400th wealthiest people in the world, according to Forbes. But to come back to the influence of the SACP, absolutely. I think that you can see it, for example, from 2017, when the SACP held their Congress in July, and then the ANC held their Congress in December. And the things that the SACP said were important, we have to amend the Competition Amendment Act, for example, were then taken up by the ANC, and then they were written into the law. The things that the SACP also wanted, the National Minimum Wage Act, and then this was also embraced by the ANC, and then it was written into the law. This was seen by the Communist Party as the precursor to a living wage, which is not just a higher wage. It also means, for example, that you must have something like the NHI. And we find the ANC embracing that idea, and it's now also being written into the law.
Isn't it also true that the ANC really didn't have any ideas of their own for a long time, and the Communist Party formed the brains trust of the ANC in some ways?
I think that's absolutely so. And Phumi's right to go back even before the 1960s, the Freedom Charter, though we are often told that it was drawn up, by the masses of South Africans and a completely, spontaneous process, seems rather to have been drawn up primarily by closet members of the SACP, which had recently been banned. And when the ANC adopted it, it was indeed the reason why people broke away to form the Pan-Africanist Congress, because they felt that the ANC's embrace of the Freedom Charter now gave the SACP too much influence over the organization. And if you look at the SACP documents, they also say that it's vital that we implement the Freedom Charter, because that is the essential foundation for the shift to socialism. So they weren't in any doubt about why they wanted the Freedom
Charter. Take them at their word.
And why they wanted the ANC to embrace it. And ever since then in 1962, they specifically embraced the NDR, the SACP, in their program in that year. And in 1969 at the Morogoro conference, the ANC then followed suit and has been implementing the NDR from the moment it acquired state power in 1994, which it very much did with the help of the SACP, because the SACP and Moscow were really the main authors of the People's War strategy that was used to weaken and, as far as possible, eliminate the ANC's black rivals, and so give it an untrammeled level of power over the new South Africa that could be used to advance the second stage of the revolution, which is the NDR.
So, but if we look at it, if we place it in a global context, where really the only ones that are left standing with some form of communism is China, which even they have a much watered down version of what communism or socialism is about. I mean, I think a couple of weeks ago, actually, with their new plan going into the future of prosperity, kind of, I'm failing to think about the exact words that they're calling this new plan of theirs.
The Chinese.
China. Yeah, the Chinese. I'll remember it.
Not Belt and Road, because that's what they're always talking about.
No. But it really is more about a controlled
shared prosperity, or
something of
like
that nature.
Yeah.
Is when you look at it and place it in a global context, we were just talking about the level of homelessness in America, people working 7 days a week and still not being able to afford healthcare, afford a home to live in, all of that kind of stuff. If you place it in a global context where people are becoming poorer everywhere, and China seems to have some kind of thing that is working right at the moment, does that then not give more impetus to people within, decision-making structures of the ANC to say, well, maybe we should be looking more to the East rather than the West in terms of how we're going to solve our problems, societal problems?
Yes, of course. South Africa undoubtedly looks very much to the East at the moment, to Russia as well, as we know, and to China. But the China's economic miracle really has been an extraordinary thing, from the days of the Cultural Revolution to where really it was Deng Xiaoping recognized that it wasn't working and you had to do something different. You needed to attract investment. It was to some degree, I would say, a variation on Lenin's new economic policy as adopted in 1921 in the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union was really struggling. And the idea was really to encourage investment to come in to a large degree of economic freedom that hadn't been permitted before, even to the point where people could now start to own property. And hugely successful in raising the level of wealth within the country.
Yeah, so let's be clear.
But on the other hand,
not communism, but a kind of a flexibility.
State capitalism in a way.
Corporatism.
Yes, it's socialism with Chinese characteristics, they put it, in which there's still a huge amount of state control.
Which is why people can disappear.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And also why...
and why some can become billionaires.
Such an emphasis on, such a control of the Western companies coming in that they have to give up so much of their intellectual property, for example. That's part of the condition of doing business in China. It's all been intended to position China to become politically and militarily much stronger. And now that we're getting closer to what the Chinese identified 2049 as the key date in which they must become the new hegemon, I think you also are beginning to see, implemented by Xi Jinping, a greater degree of Communist Party control as well. The cells which have always operated in companies in China, supposedly private companies, are being told to increase their influence. One wonders how many cadres they have deployed, and how many of the senior leadership in many of companies which look independent on the outside are actually also cadres.
Yeah, well,
but I'm not an expert
Huawei,
in this area. But I think is what we do see is South Africa having had this determination to embrace socialism for many decades, getting the chance to do it from 1994 with the taking of state power. And it's absolute determination to pursue it, even though the consequence at this point is a great deal of suffering for the people of South Africa, economically and in other ways.
So are they not hiding the ball here? Because the NDR is something that is, you can read about this. They're publishing their own manifesto, and the NDR is the central linchpin in most of it anyway. So it's not being hidden. Why are people so unaware of it? What is the NDR? For people who are completely flabbergasted now, they're listening to you going, my God, Anthea Jeffery, what have you uncovered here with your, you've been sitting in dark rooms late at night talking to people who are smoking cigars and hiding away. Why are people so surprised that this is happening? And what can you tell us about, first of all, what it is, and second of all, how it's come about and manifested itself in our economy and in our society?
Right. So what is it?
Yeah.
Yes, you could summarize it as a Moscow-inspired strategy to take a newly independent country from capitalism to socialism by incremental steps and over a period of time. Sometimes you can do it pretty quickly, and it was done pretty quickly, for example, in a country like Indonesia, also Mozambique. Sometimes you have to be much slower. And why is that? Because there are times when it wasn't the Communist Party alone in a particular country that drove the process to independence. There were national organizations involved too. And then there's not much support for communism in that country, and it has to be a slow process. And what you particularly need to do is gradually cripple the capitalist economy so that it's not functioning well at all. And at the same time, keep putting forward the solution as more government control and more dependency on the state. So if there now aren't enough jobs, partly because you've so priced the inexperienced, unskilled youth out of work, well, then you will say, but the state can offer you work. And increasing the amount of public employment is now a big strategy of the ANC. They say it's the only solution.
Panyaza Lusufi.
Yeah, indeed.
Every week.
Yes. And permanent jobs, not just temporary stopgaps, permanent jobs with decent wages that are going to cost 200 billion or so to fund at the beginning. And the idea is, as you cripple the economy and you expand state control and the dependency of the people on the state for their core needs, you can finally get to the point where you've entirely de-linked people from the capitalist economy. They are now entirely dependent on the state. So all education is run by the state, nothing private. All healthcare is controlled by the state. Private sector resources may be used by the state, but there's no autonomy on the part of the private sector. The state decides. And that we see with the NHI, and the same with pensions. And at the end of it is that property, of course, must increasingly move into state control, if not ownership, so custodianship, if not ownership. And so in the end, there's none of that capacity for economic independence, which is vital also to political independence.
And, in South Africa, we have a particularly interesting world in that we have this huge dichotomy and the pull of private sector because, crippling a private sector so that there's more and more state control has a level of acquiescence from the private players too. But what we have here, and we saw this 3 weeks ago with 115 private companies signing up to help government, saying we're going to help government try and deliver the services, fix where they can, or where you have people like Discovery's Adrian Gore very vocal in favor of something like the NHI. Does this mean that our private companies, in your view, are very much part of this countdown and they're happy to hurtle down towards...
As long as they get eaten last.
Perhaps, but I think really they don't understand the ANC's perspective on the disciplining of capital. In other words, I don't have a chapter on it, that they're very well aware of the resources that the private sector controls, and those resources are enormous. Just take pensions at 6.9 trillion overall, about 4.5 trillion or so as private pensions. And they want to be able to control those resources and bend them to the use of the revolution. And their propaganda, of course, is useful to that purpose because you don't ever tell business what it is that you're seeking to achieve. They're also very well of how they can use their state power to encourage this process. So they talk about using legislation, regulation, public-private partnerships, and if need be, outright expropriation and confiscation. So the private sector may not be reading this kind of material and fully aware of it, but I think what they are fully aware of is what the government has already done to increase regulation over business. And a lot of it has been done under the rubric of BEE, which means that businesses, knowing how difficult it is to comply with BEE, are slightly anxious about not being in the government's bad books.
Yeah.
Because if you irritate the state, they can come and look very closely at whether your BEE deal is sufficient, what your score is, and you can always be excluded from contracts or permits or other things. So I think sometimes there's also just a straight naivete that there's a failure to understand that the ANC SACP sees business as the main enemy of the NDR, is determined, therefore, to take control of its resources, bend them to the purposes of the revolution, use its state power in order to achieve that. And ultimately, as you were saying, sort of eat them last.
But when you consider that, one of the things that we look at in South Africa, with almost all our legislation, with the way that our state-owned enterprises are run and constructed, it is not without the hand of many multinational consultancies a la Bain, McKinsey, and those guys. So are you saying that those guys also have very similar kind of yearnings because that's who helped shape all of these kinds of, even the way that the BE regulations are constructed. Lots of consultants came in and multinational consultants. NHI is not new and unique to South Africa. It's based very much on a model in the UK. So are those guys also pushing a socialist NDR agenda?
I think in many countries in the world, not necessarily the businesses, let me come back to that, but I do think in many countries in the world, over the last 30 years, since the Soviet Union was disbanded, people have forgotten about the 100 million deaths that were recorded in the Black Book of Communism in 1999. Many of them in the Soviet Union, even more of them in China, also in Cambodia, Vietnam, Cuba, you name it. altogether 100 million deaths. But the knowledge of all that repression has faded. I think people growing up now are much more aware of Nazi death camps than they are of the Gulag. And so it's
No,
been
absolutely.
possible
Lots of history is revised.
for all the socialist communist parties that remained, and there are lots of them belonging to the Socialist International, they get together to plan. The left-leaning activists, academics, commentators have really, media have switched to a different sort of socialism. They often talk about it as socialism is all about human rights, the right to education, the right to health. This is what Hani himself said in the early 1990s. And they are trying to achieve it more by Gramscian means. In other words, that you infiltrate the institutions, you start breaking down the core institutions that have underpinned the capitalist system from the family through to the church. And you must very much have an influence in the universities and the media. And I think,
Without a
ideas
doubt,
which
that's happened.
promote...
In
yes.
America, that's happened without a doubt. I don't think anyone, unless they're completely blinkered and or willingly ignorant, would
will
look
not
at the
see that.
US academic situation at the moment and not say that this has been captured by leftists.
Exactly. And increasingly now we see much more emphasis on critical race theory and the idea that the society is always divided into these oppressive victim groups, etc. And all of this is useful to the ANC back here.
But I don't want us to go down a conspiratorial
to-
path.
on the
Just
other
let's hear
hand-
I want to hear the end of this.
All right.
So I think it's just possible that with the Soviet Union no longer there as a sort of terrible example of repression, and with China having gone this route, the sort of new economic policy route, the horrors of socialism are far less evident. There's a great deal of, I would call it propaganda, which is anti-capitalist. Many young people, I think, are disillusioned with capitalism, which is less able to meet needs for housing and so on, partly because the prices of assets have been so pushed up by the kind of money creation that we've had for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
And socialism at the same time is given a pretty good press, where you do hear people saying, what we need is for the state to be providing more for citizens.
We saw it during COVID.
Yeah.
The state will help you. The state will look after you, which leads me to my question. The ANC, bring it back home, is hopelessly incompetent. Everything they do badly. There's not an example I can think of where they've successfully achieved even their own goals, misplaced as some of those goals might be. So how worried should we be about the NDR when these guys can't organize a piss up in a brewery?
The trouble is, it's quite easy to pass a law, and the laws are very destructive. And the laws, business will certainly be keen to implement them, as you mentioned, in the case of the NHI. So, and you don't need a high level of efficiency. This isn't the basis on which a socialist society is judged. If you think of Venezuela, which is a country perhaps in some ways similar to South Africa, it was wealthy, very developed economy, quite a diverse and complex economy. And yet it has been absolutely impoverished through 21st century socialism, which hasn't improved efficiency in any way, which has left the country unable to provide electricity, very often water supplies failing, food is no longer available, a lot of people are hungry and have lost weight. Hyperinflation has wiped out savings, GDP has contracted by 70%. But the socialists, the government is absolutely entrenched in power because they have also used that increasing economic power and the fact that people are now dependent on the state to benefit some and harm others. If you want to get ahead, you need to be on the government's side. You could manage to bypass Parliament. They packed the Supreme Court and enlarged it, packed it. And so the checks and balances on executive power have also been diminished. And that sort of thing they are very efficient at. The fact that people struggle and suffer and that there's no efficiency in running electricity doesn't matter.
But what we also see here in South Africa, speaking of the inefficiency of government, is we also see a very rapid selling off of state assets into private hands, whether it is an SAA on the one hand, and earlier we were just talking about the power distribution plants being sold off by President Geordin into what is essentially a PPP, or if we talk about independent power producers and all of those licenses. So we see a lot of privatizing happening at the same time as you're talking about us having to worry about a countdown towards socialism. These two things look like they are on opposite ends of the scale.
I think it's still the disciplining of capital that we're seeing. In other words, you use the resources, but you don't give up the control. I think the SAA is the only agreement, not yet finalized, that I'm aware of, in which there's going to be a 51% stake going to, the Takatso consortium. But one of the key players there's Jabu Malaketi, who is close to the ANC, probably seemed to be part of the SSCP at some point.
Fraser's husband.
So is this also a use of cadres, the sort of thing that China has done and that Russia might have done when it privatized, certainly. But much of those assets went to former members of the KGB, who may still be quite sympathetic to the sort of grander Russia project that Putin's now implementing. But if you look at the Transnet concessioning, none of it has been on terms of the private sector so far has been able to cope with, except for the Durban Pier 2. But if you look at the details of that, it's the government that will keep 51%, and the Philippine company will get 49%. And they are very clear.
The Philippine company looking very much like a shell of a Chinese company.
Yes, absolutely. Could be. I haven't looked into it. But I think that's the model. You'll use the public-private partnership. You'll give the private sector as much as 49%, but you will generally keep control. If rarely you let it go up to 51%, you'll make it sure that it's in safe hands. In other words, probably cadre hands. And at the end of the day, there's no intention to embark on privatization. And that message comes quite clearly from David Masonda, our Deputy Minister of Finance, and others. So I don't think that we should see the fact that the private sector is being brought in as evidence that the ANC is now convinced that the NDR is perhaps a bit mistaken. Capital should be allowed to thrive. The idea is that capital should be allowed to help the NDR.
So, okay, you've created a very bleak picture of not just the NDR, but socialism and in the ultimate communism. What about social democracy in places like Germany?
I think that's a very different thing. You have a level of economic freedom there, which is really completely different from what you had in a truly socialist state, what you have in a country like Venezuela, which has now gone, excuse me, right to the bottom of the index of economic freedom. And the Nordic countries are often, I think, also cited as evidence of sort of democratic socialism. But I think, again, there you have a level of economic freedom in terms of entrepreneurship and companies being able to function. You also have a very high level of taxation, which runs from the most wealthy to people that we might even regard as being in the lower middle class. They're all paying a very high level of tax. And this is used for a very generous welfare system. But it's different from what is envisaged in a socialist system.
And it's debatable whether or not that will be sustainable going forward with an aging population and no replacement.
Yeah.
And immigration.
So then the question is, with all of the research that you've done and all of the work of looking into not just this NDR, but what it looks like around the world, and what then? So Quo Vadis, what is to be done and where to go to next? What then is to be done when on the one hand, you see lots of young people looking at purely capitalist environments and feeling that they have failed or they fail to give a alternative solution. You know, when they look at working endless hours and still not being able to cut the threshold in terms of what you are able to afford, particularly when it comes to basic needs. And on the other hand, you're looking at a completely inadequate state that cannot provide. What then is an alternative, particularly in a place like South Africa, where we have 30 million people living on less than 20 Rand a day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me not go down the UK and other rabbit holes. Let me just focus on what can we do. I think the first thing we need to recognize is that the ANC is totally committed to this. Most people may not know about it, but it's their end goal.
Who's pushing it in the ANC?
The SACP, the ANC leadership, which I think is very intertwined. I think it's probably quite often
There's people like Pravin Gordhan and...
Yes,
Okay.
undoubtedly.
All right.
I
the
saw somebody in
SACP
the
leaders.
comments here talking about Jacob Zuma being anti the NDR, which is actually not true because he was also a member of the Communist Party.
Exactly. And he came in 2009, and Mbeki was pushed out because Mbeki had talked about concessioning Transnet, etc. And he had talked about allowing more of a private sector role in the building of Eskom, and they weren't ready to do that then. They thought that he was missing the point. He had embraced gear because he wanted to keep us out of the clutches of the IMF and our high level of debt at that point.
He
and
paid
so
off the debt. He
we
paid off
it
that
down.
debt and gave them money.
We paid down a lot of our debt. So we got to the point where the debt was only 26% of GDP. And that freed up resources for the grants and so on. But Mbeki's idea was not to jettison the NDR. It was to create space for the NDR by making sure we didn't come under structural adjustment at the hands of the IMF. But he certainly irritated the SACP and others at COSATU who thought that he had misread it, that he was looking at the local balance of forces and not recognizing how far one could push. And so they pushed him out. They brought Jacob Zuma in because he promised that he would do the things that they wanted, including expropriation without compensation, which emerged in his period. And then he became an embarrassment because he was so obviously stealing, and the Guptas were not a good look in any way for the country. And so Cyril Ramaphosa was brought in instead. And really, I think he was spun as a pragmatic businessman who could be relied on for business-friendly reforms. He himself never said that. He talked about New Dawn, and that terminology comes straight from Franklin Roosevelt, who was very statist in his orientation. And we have seen just recently that Ramaphosa expresses great support for the NDR at the SACP Congress last year. He said that the ANC would do all in its power to advance the NDR, which is the joint program of the ANC and the SACP and the reason for the existence of our alliance. So that's a very strong statement in support of the NDR, but it's not that Mr. Ramaphosa hasn't made such statements in the past as well. I think he's feeling more confident to be more open, partly because the NDR is already far advanced, hard to roll it back, and partly because the global environment, which they constantly stand, is helpful too. So what can we do? First of all, blow the whistle on the NDR, try to make people have greater knowledge of it so that they feel less baffled about what the ANC is doing and more forewarned about what lies ahead, and so can be forearmed about how to stop it. And critically, we have an election in 2024. And if you look at the numbers from the 2019 election, we had 10 million people who voted for the ANC and 18 million eligible voters who didn't go to the polls at all, either didn't register or, though registered, didn't turn out to vote. So those 18 million potential swing voters is a very big pool of voters. And if they can be persuaded to vote for opposition parties, and we know now that there's the National Convention next week, with the DA, Action SA, the IFP, other organizations trying to get together to offer a better alternative for South Africa. And we can, I have no doubt, come with a better alternative. The IR, for one, has a growth strategy in which we're going to be emphasizing the need for growth. That's the fundamental. But also to make it possible for all those who are suffering so badly to participate in a growing economy, which partly needs, obviously, we need to stop the labor laws which price people out of the market. And we need a much better model of empowerment that reaches down to the grassroots and gives people who have no hope of ever benefiting from BEE, but if anything, suffer from it because it deters investment, it reduces growth, it limits the jobs.
It's often a Trojan horse. I mean, it's just placing people who are close to the political bosses in positions where they can act out the interests of those people within private corporations.
Yes. I love hearing somebody else say that there are it's a little bit, the number's grown a little bit. It's almost 25 million people that are available for us to mobilize to get to the polls. But then you wake up on last week, Friday, to the news that the DA and the ANC are the main signatories of a national coalition, kind of coming up with a National Coalition Act. And when you look at the...
No, I don't think so. I think that's why it's been spun, unfortunately, because many people will think that's what they did. But at this gathering last week, the Deputy President was putting forward the ANC's views, stressing the fact that we need to have a threshold so that in our proportional election system, so that you have fewer small parties, because a coalition that has to include many, many, many small parties is probably inherently unstable. And there is validity in that. And it's the reason why very many countries with proportional representation systems do have a threshold, whether it's 1%, 2%, 5% in Germany. And the DA has the same idea, that unstable coalitions are going to be difficult. And it knows that the ANC is raising the spectre of ungovernability if people do vote not for it. And then we have to have a coalition government, which will make the whole place be utterly unstable. So the DA, in a way, is in a difficult position. It agrees that there should be a threshold, and the smaller parties are absolutely not in favor of that for obvious reasons. And then it is spun as an agreement between the ANC and the DA, and showing how this toenadering means that the DA is not really genuine about wanting to go into a coalition with the smaller parties. It's going to lead them down the garden path and then betray them.
Why shouldn't we believe them? Look what they did to Mampela Rampela.
Well, as I understand it, as I recall, she said that she was had to become the president of the DA, but she didn't want to become a member. And I think there was a realization suddenly on the part of the DA that it would be a very awkward thing to be led by a person who didn't feel committed enough to the DA to become a member of it. And so there was a parting of the ways, and there probably should have been a much more talking and working things out before the agreement was ever reached.
I haven't heard the name Mampela Rampela for a long time.
Hey,
There's someone I'm kind of glad we've forgotten about.
No, actually, that's not a good thing. It's in the same way that we talk about a revising of history. The problem that we have in South Africa is we have such short memories, or either we have such short memories, or we're so busy being distracted by all of the smoke and mirrors in front of us that we forget things that are incredibly critical when making decisions and going forward and reading the tea leaves of what's happening in front of us, right? Because we forget. We've forgotten those things, and we shouldn't forget.
I want to, unfortunately, I have to draw this to a close. Just to let everybody know, Anthea Jeffery, of course, is the head of policy research at the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. She's authored 11 books, including BEE, Helping or Hurting, People's War, New Light on the Struggle for South Africa, and a number of others. She's written extensively on things like property rights, land reform, the mining sector, which we discussed the other day, and there's a whole thing we could unpack there too. I'm sorry that we've run out of time, but I do need to get to the Cape Town mayor, who wants to update us on what's going on over there. So thank you, and well done on the book. I think everybody should read this. People should pay attention. This is what's really going on. It's not some conspiracy. It's not something that people can poo-poo and throw away and not pay attention to. It's happening, whether we like it or not. Exactly. And this is the guiding light that everybody always wants to know. What's the ANC on about? This is it. So look at the book. It's called Countdown to Socialism, the National Democratic Revolution in South Africa since 1994. Thank you, Anthea.
Thank you.
What a pleasure to have you here.
It was wonderful having you here.
Yeah, very, very cool. So I'm going to take us to the mayor of Cape Town now, who I interviewed last night. I know it was a public holiday. Just hang on one second. It was a public holiday, but he made time to speak to us about what's been going on in Cape Town. And here it is, a quick update for you with Geordin Hill-Lewis. Geordin Hill-Lewis is the mayor of Cape Town, and just a couple of hours ago, day ago or so, he said to the residents of Cape Town that he's going to take in hand the ongoing acts of violence and intimidation perpetrated by taxi associations, and put out a notice to everybody, and has been in the news since then, trying to deal with this problem. I welcome him to the show now. Geordin Hill-Lewis, Mayor of Cape Town. How are you, sir?
Gareth, I want to be honest with you. It's been a stressful week, but I'm hanging in there. Thank you very much.
Yeah. What is the state of play at the moment? Santaco obviously have reneged on what you thought was a deal. And it seems to me that the people of Cape Town are getting a little bit more concerned than they were 2 days ago and before the weekend. It was a public holiday today. So any changes in that today?
Right now, as we are speaking, Santaco is locked in an internal engagement. They have been for several hours. We are not part of that meeting, and so we have no idea what their final decision is going to be. I think there is a reasonable risk that the strike will continue since they have not extracted any concession whatsoever, and it has still only been we're now approaching about 36 hours without any incident on the roads. So we will wait to hear, probably much later tonight. Just to remind viewers that the strike was supposed to end tonight and back to normal resumption of taxi service tomorrow. I think there is a reasonable risk, unfortunately, that it may continue for a few days still.
Well, I'm relieved to hear that there haven't been any incidents for some hours. But what is the tally so far of the damage caused and the chaos that's been created by this strike since it began?
25 burnt out vehicles, one reasonably badly damaged, I would say moderately damaged community clinic in Khayelitsha. We have had number of cars thrown with stones and unfortunately people injured in those stoning attacks. We have sadly had 5 people dying, including, which has just been announced, a British doctor who was a tourist trying to get to the airport and sadly took a wrong turn after Google directed him away from the N2 because the N2 was blockaded.
Oh, man.
And very, very sadly, and I feel this one very personally, one of our City of Cape Town law enforcement officers, Officer Zanikayo Kwinana, father of 4, 32 years old, was murdered this weekend by taxi rogues. That does not count the cost. It doesn't begin to count the costs for businesses and for interrupted lives and difficulties. So the cost, Gareth, has been tremendous.
I'm very sorry to hear that. Obviously, for ordinary people in Cape Town who are not necessarily in the thick of things here, people are just trying to get to work, people who are trying to get supplies into their stores, people who are trying to just live their lives. This has been very annoying to perhaps a little bit more than that. But clearly, I mean, I can only say our sympathies go out to those who've had far more devastating consequences. So what is the situation here? I mean, are we being held hostage? And by we, I mean the people of South Africa, by the taxi bosses and the taxi associations. How much power do they have? How difficult is it to sit down in good faith with these people and negotiate things?
It's extremely difficult to sit down in good faith and negotiate, trying to come up with a solution when you know that you really do feel, and this is why I use the word literal, not because anyone has held me up with a gun, but you really do feel as though you have a gun to your head, because if you don't agree or if you say no, that there's going to be another explosion of rogue violence outside in the streets. And so it has been extremely tough to have any kind of good faith negotiation, and that's why we've drawn the line that we have drawn in those circumstances. And the problem is, it is a very powerful industry. They have a huge amount of influence, not just because of their threats, implicit threats of violence, but because of the number of people that they move around. And I'm glad that you asked that question, because their power would be diminished in South Africa if we had a functioning rail system. And I have not yet made this point publicly, but perhaps now is exactly the right time to do it. We would not have been in such a serious position if the calls that I have made for the last 2 years, which have fallen on deaf ears, to take over the metro rail system in Cape Town ourselves, had been heeded. If we had a functioning train system in South Africa, the power of the stranglehold that the taxi industry has over the economy would be diminished, and that would help in situations exactly like this.
So, Mayor, what do they want? I mean, what are they telling you that they want, and what do you suspect they really want? And I'm only asking that question in a sort of fork-tongued manner, because sometimes people say that they want a certain thing, but they're actually asking for something else. And you did say it's hard to talk in good faith with these guys. So let me hear.
They have a complaint about the length of time that it takes to get new operating licenses and new routes approved. That is a serious complaint. But really what it boils down to is the issue of impoundments. We have started in, I would say, the last year to much more energetically and vigorously enforce the law that empowers us to impound vehicles for bad road behavior, unsafe, reckless driving, unroadworthy vehicles, and so on. So it is absolutely true that we are impounding more vigorously than we did previously, because we find that it is the only effective mechanism that we have. Traffic fines are simply not effective as a mechanism to change driver behavior. And this is what this is all about. It's about changing driver and owner behavior to make it more safe. And we find that when with 50,000 fines a month, very few of them get paid. You then have to wait for that person to get an arrest warrant and hope that you find them at a traffic stop or a vehicle checkpoint. With the impoundment, if you see them driving on the wrong side of the road or driving on the pedestrian sidewalk, jumping a red light or whatever, there can be immediate consequences that makes that driver permanently reconsider whether that kind of behavior is wise. And it makes the owner of that taxi as well responsible for the conduct of his employee. So that is really a very powerful mechanism, and that's why we do it, and they want it to stop. Now, it's very important to stress, we are not unique. This is a national piece of legislation that we are empowered to impound under. The difference is that we have turned up the volume. That is definitely true. We've turned up the volume, but it is not as though we are doing something that is not available to be done elsewhere. We are just using the power that the legislation gives us.
So what is the story about how you impounded a bunch of taxis because they had broken the rules and they'd blocked roads and done everything else during the course of the strike, which you're entitled to do as the city? And this Minister of Transport of ours, Sindisiwe Chikunga, has apparently said, no, they must be released, and you're outside of the scope of your authority here.
No, I'm afraid the minister is not, strangely, familiar with the legislation. We are entirely within our rights to impound a vehicle that is blockading a national highway, and she has no legal authority whatsoever to instruct us to release that vehicle. In fact, we do not even have the authority to instruct that vehicle to be released, because once it's booked into the pound, and an offense notice has been issued, just like you and I, Gareth, when we get a speeding fine, you have to make representations to the traffic court. It's not in the whim of some politician it should never be at the whim of some politician to remove that notice of offense. So in fact, even when we book that vehicle into the pound, it then is handed over to the jurisdiction of the traffic court. And here's a critical point that I made to the minister. If the person challenges the validity of the impoundment, they are welcome to challenge it in court. There is legal recourse. They have never once done that. That is a critical point to make. They've never once used their legal recourse to challenge the validity of the impoundment. And I think that is telling.
So how much power do the taxi associations and the taxi owners, because we know a lot of them are politically connected, how much power do they have in terms of lobbying? I mean, if they can get this minister involved in something which really shouldn't be her department at all, how many friends do they have in high places?
Yes, that's a great point. I think probably the most disconcerting thing this week is how national ministers who are elected to protect the public at large and protect commuters at large have just so quickly fallen in with the arguments of the taxi industry. Similarly, to perhaps a lesser degree, but still the police minister as well. Similarly, with some figures in the media who have just fallen in with the arguments of the taxi industry and tried to find a way. Actually, this has happened many interviews that I've done. Try to find a way to blame the city for violence, blame the city for the burning of a community clinic in Site C, one of our own clinics in Site C in Khayelitsha. This, it's just frankly farcical.
Well, I mean, the media are always looking for a reason to blame the city of Cape Town or the Western Cape in general, and hold you to a higher standard than anyone else. We've had similar strikes in Pretoria, where another DA mayor is doing his best to try and bring things under control. Why is all of this happening now? I mean, we know that the country is very fractious at the moment. There's quite a lot of economic pressure on people. We know that, there's some people in this country who just assume that an automatic increase is on the cards in certain government departments, for example. But why is it all happening now?
I think it does definitely relate to how we have turned up the volume on impoundments, or turned up the heat, I suppose is the right metaphor on impoundments. That is a relatively recent, probably about a year old. And the industry immediately raised concerns with us and objections with us. We set up a kind of forum, a discussion forum called the Taxi Team to discuss those concerns. And that is what they withdrew from last week, Wednesday, I think it was, or Tuesday, and then decided on the strike. So I think that's the main reason for the timing. But they gave us no forewarning of the strike. As you know, it happened in the middle of the day, which I think was a terrible disservice to.
It's an illegal strike, and you've decided to take quite a hard line, and you're going to hold that hard line. Is that right?
Undoubtedly, it's. I think that it's not just about Cape Town as well, Gareth. If we send the message to people in South Africa that you can get concessions from government by violence, then we, down that path lies only destruction. We have to send the message that you will never get any concession so long as you engage in violence.
All right, so you still have the worst mayoral job in the country because you've got lots and lots of people pouring into Cape Town the whole time. How is semigration affecting you on a much more general level? And are you guys equipped infrastructurally, and do you have budget to build more infrastructure to accommodate all these people who want to come to your land of milk and honey, as opposed to places like the Eastern Cape, which are, in Donald Trump's words, shitholes?
No, we are under pressure. Semigration is putting massive pressure on our infrastructure. You'll see that a central plank of my mayoralty thus far has been to hugely accelerate infrastructure investment in the city by many multiples, not just by percentage increases, but by multiples. This year, we've just finished the highest expenditure ever recorded by the city on infrastructure. This coming year, the financial year we've just started, we will nearly double that. We will double the record. So we are going big on infrastructure, and it is precisely to prepare the city for the tremendous pressure we have already faced over the last decade, and that which I think is only accelerating day by day.
What's happening with property prices in Cape Town as a result of this?
I just got some data. I can't share my screen now, but property prices are completely bifurcating from the rest of the country.
Really?
They are diverging really markedly. So people are, and it's an important point to make, that people are overall getting wealthier because of a good government in the Western Cape. And of course, people don't necessarily feel wealthier just because their house value is increasing. But for most families, that is their single most valuable asset, perhaps alongside their pension funds. So when the price of that asset goes up, it does absolutely affect their overall well-being. So that's nice to see. And of course, it comes with trouble as well. It means it's very difficult for young people to get onto the property ladder in Cape Town. It's becoming a very expensive place to live. So you've got to keep up with the pressure as well of trying to make it easier to build more homes to bring the prices down.
And Are there any other unforeseen consequences of this strike that have caught even you by surprise? You've got a good team of people there who are hopefully hard at work trying to stem any kind of problems that occur. But are there things that have happened that you didn't expect? And are there lessons learned so far in this strike that you will be sure not to have repeated?
That's a great question. It's been so hectic. I haven't yet had time to properly reflect on lessons, but one that has crossed my mind, and this might be surprising since I've taken such a strong line the last few days, but I wonder whether it would not have been wiser to take an extremely tough line from the first moment of the strike, and not even engage in those discussions that we had on Friday afternoon, which they reneged on. Because I get the sense that once you are kind of locked into a pattern of negotiation, you're expected to make concessions and compromises. And when in fact, or if in fact, we had drawn a very solid line right at word go and said there will be no concession or compromise so long as the strike persists, never mind the violence, perhaps we would be even in a slightly stronger position than we are now. I feel we're in a reasonably strong position, but I'll reflect on that lesson and hopefully apply it for the next time.
And just one last thing, the political consequences of something like this can be unforeseen for a while. But obviously, other political parties would have taken their opportunity to have a swipe at you for being authoritarian and coming down hard on the taxis. And a lot of these people in the ANC certainly have friends and family who own a lot of taxis and are very much enmeshed there. I think it is the public of South Africa who paid for all those new taxis, isn't it?
Yes, it is, exactly, through the recap
We
program.
all technically should own a piece of it, but it's just something that was taken out of the treasury and given to a bunch of people who run taxis.
Oh, we've had so much jumping on the bandwagon or jumping on the taxi, so to speak, from political parties, but that's completely to be expected, and I assure you does not cause me a moment's discomfort. What really causes me discomfort is when I see the real strife that residents and commuters are going through. Yesterday, I went and joined a bus that is being escorted. We are busy escorting hundreds of buses around the city so that people can still move safely. And I met a little old lady traveling from Mitchell's Plain to Easter River on the bus with me, who hasn't seen her husband because her husband was visiting her son and they were separated. And they haven't seen each other for 3 days because there was no public transport. So that's the kind of thing that I really keep front of mind. I really couldn't care less what other political parties are saying. I have to try and always focus on what I think is right and what the principles at stake are, and then try to plan to help people deal with the consequences of this violence and the strike.
All right. Well, all I can say is power to you. I hope you get this sorted out for the people of Cape Town. It certainly appears to me that you've got a lot of public opinion on your side. And I'm fairly sure that things will be resolved sooner rather than later. I hope you share that sentiment.
I do. No, I do think so. I'm hoping tonight still. I'm secretly hoping we get it done tonight.
Holding thumbs. All right, Geordin, thank you so much for your time. I know you've been very busy. Thanks for talking to us.
Great pleasure. Nice to be with you again.